Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, morimili wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you would join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. The guest today is Carissa Turpin. She is here to celebrate Doomsday Danny, her debut middle grade novel. Before we invite Carissa into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids. At Reading With Your Kids on Instagram. If you're at Pinterest, please be sure to check out our Reading With Your Kids page. On YouTube, it's the Reading With Your Kids channel on YouTube. And we would love for you to connect with us on Twitter at GentlyMagic. And of course, we'd love for you to visit our two websites, readingwithyourkids.com. And also, please be sure to check out our new webpage, drawingwithyourkids.com. We have some of the best illustrators in all of children's literature coming on to teach you and your kids how to draw a character from their beautiful children's book. Check it out today, readingwithyourkids.com and drawingwithyourkids.com. Join us right now from Louisville and the beautiful state of Kentucky. Our guest is here today to celebrate her middle grade novel. It's her debut middle grade novel. It's called Doomsday Danny. Please welcome to the show, Carissa Turpin. Hey, Carissa, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Well, I'm a little bit cold. It's snowing here in Boston. That never makes me happy.
Well, I definitely understand that. As somebody who lived in Phoenix for a few years, I'm still getting used to this winter weather. So my condolences.
Well, I'm really excited because Doomsday Danny, as I understand it, Doomsday Danny is talking about a pretty weird time in history, a time that I lived through and I experienced all the weirdness. It's set in 1999, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell us all about the story, please.
Well, so the story actually came about. I am a middle grade educator, and I was talking to my students in 2019, and they were kind of hanging around the classroom. They were getting ready to go home for the holiday break. And one said to the other, it will be so weird to see the calendar go from 2019 to 2020. And I said, yeah, y'all weren't around, but there was a time when the calendar went from 1999 to 2000, and we thought, the world was going to end. And they were just shocked. They had never heard of that. In their world, cell phones update automatically. So this idea of like widespread technology failure was something they couldn't understand. So it was clear to me they had never heard of the event Y2K before. A few months after this conversation took place, COVID happened. And so school shut down, and I found myself with a lot more time on my hands. So I sat down and, kind of wrote out the idea I'd had at that time of writing a Y2K book. But Doomsday Danny is about a 12-year-old girl named Danny Collier. She is a doomsday prepper. She becomes a doomsday prepper because she reads a blog online that talks a lot about Y2K. And as someone who was kind of seeing young people maybe get their information from less than reliable sources online, I felt like it was something really important to include in the book. But Danny reads this blog so much that she becomes fixated on Y2K. She becomes convinced it's going to happen. She prepares for it. And then, of course, when it doesn't, she's got to kind of deal with the fallout and maybe some things in her own life that she had been avoiding. So that's kind of how it came to be, and a summary of what it's about.
Well, I think this is fantastic. As somebody, I think I shared with you in an email, I was performing New Year's Eve 1999. I was out of town, and my I wasn't crazy concerned about Y2K. I think it didn't make sense to me that all this technology would just shut down and have a stroke and thinking, oh, it's not 19 anymore. Nah, we're gonna die. It didn't make sense to me. But I do remember going back after my performance, going back to the hotel, thinking, is my key going to let me into the room? Am I gonna have to sleep in my van tonight?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's so cool about it. And everyone that I talked to has their own, who was, old enough to have sort of an understanding of the event and what was going on. They have their own Y2K story. And I think it's interesting because it brings people together to talk about an event where maybe there was even an inkling, a fear that something would go wrong, but ultimately you turned out okay. And I think that's why Doomsday Danny was so cathartic to write, especially during the peak of COVID, was because I was like, if I can write about a girl who fears that something terrible is going to happen, but I know as the author that she's ultimately going to be okay, then maybe I can feel that way during this scary time, and I can help my students kind of feel that way too.
It's interesting. There's so much. I hope we have enough time for everything here. So much to talk about. I was thinking, contrasting the two situations that you're talking about, Y2K, where we literally had at least a year, if not more, of panic. And like people, as you said, people prepping and storing food. And, I think there are people who still have food left over from their Y2K prep. So we had that situation where there's a doomsday scenario coming, and we had all this time to prepare, and compare that to what we just went through, where we had this pandemic where we had 2 weeks. By the way, we're going to shut down. Well, we had a week, and we're going to shut down for 2 weeks, and then we'll be back to normal. And then 3 years later, we're almost still kind of sort of maybe going back in the lockdown. But so on the one hand, we had all this time to prepare, and the other hand, we had no time to prepare. I think we kind of get through COVID pretty good. Obviously, it was tragic for many, many people. Many people lost their lives, and that's a tragedy. But for the most part, we've come out of it okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And but you bring up the idea that the panic that ensued. I wonder what would have happened if we had a year and a half to panic about the COVID virus.
Oh, I think certainly things would have turned out much differently. And, I think we would see a little bit more permeation of COVID and kind of like a more dismissive attitude about COVID in our culture. Something that's really interesting that a lot of people forget about 1999 is this idea of the world ending in 1999 kind of ushering in an apocalypse or an end of the world situation. It was something that was present in the music. It was something that was, very much a part of pop culture. So I think not only, if we had more time to prepare and think about COVID, hopefully it would have had a much better outcome. But also I think the sort of discussion of it and even the dismissiveness of it would be a bigger part of our everyday lives.
Another thing you brought up, and certainly in 1999, we did have an early version of the internet, and there were blogs, but certainly we didn't have access to information that kids are bombarded with today. And even so, there were lots of folks getting all sorts of contradictory information from less than reliable sources. We've talked a lot here on the podcast about how important it is for parents to talk to their kids about where they get their information from. As a teacher, somebody who's working with middle grade kids, what's the most important message or lesson you have for those kids in terms of how they can discern whether or not the information they're getting is trustworthy?
I think something that I always try to think about is the credibility of the person who is giving you that information. So, for example, Danny trusts a blogger named Professor Prepared. And nowhere in the book do we find out Professor Prepared's qualifications to give prepping advice, his qualifications as far as what he knows about computers and what he knows about the Y2K disaster. So that's why I really think Doomsday Danny is an important book, because I think, parents are going to love it for the nostalgia angle, but there's also a lot of really important information as far as who you should trust. And if the person who is telling you to do something or buy something or believe something is someone who does not have the credentials to back up what they're saying, and is someone who is getting something out of it, Professor Prepared runs an online store. So, he's allowed to sell products through his blog posts. So if the person who is giving you that information does not have the knowledge to back it up, and they themselves are getting something from that blog post or that website, then I think it's really important for kids to kind of stop, pause, and evaluate, okay, what is this speaker getting from my viewership? And is this someone who is worth listening to on this particular topic?
You bring up a really, really good point. One of the things that was important for me when my kids were younger was to help them understand, help them become media literate, to help them understand that all media are created by somebody with a certain intention. They want you to do something, they want you to believe something, or they want you to buy something. And I think when we give our kids that information and challenge our kids to say, okay, what are you watching? Who made it? And why do you think they made it? What was their motive behind it? It could be a great motive, but they do have a motive. They didn't just wake up one day and out of the goodness of their heart decide, well, I'm going to spend all this time and energy to create this media project.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, and I'm really fortunate that I work in a school where we teach media literacy. But if that's not the case, at your child's school, I would certainly encourage you to start a conversation, use this as a springboard to start that conversation, because kids can access information at a rate that is alarming and mind-blowing, but also very, to their advantage and great in some aspects as well. So it's really important, more so than in 1999, for kids to understand media literacy. And I think this book is a great way to start that conversation.
Yeah. When I was studying media literacy myself, when my kids were younger, and it was back in the 90s, one of the statistics that was really kind of surprising or eye-opening to me at that time, and we're talking like 20, 25 years ago, at that time, it was estimated that kids encounter 3,000 media messages every day. I think that is, today, that's at least triple, if not more. You think of all the messages that kids are getting, and every one of those TikTok reels that your kid, that's a message, that's a media message, is created by something with an intention. And the billboards and the advertisements and the podcasts. I mean, kids are literally bombarded with media and messaging at a rate we've never experienced before.
Oh, yeah. And, that's something that we're always discussing as educators, is how to teach kids to be good consumers of information and good critical thinkers. And I think that the only way you can really do it is to show them examples of bad media or predatory media where someone is obviously trying to get them to buy something or to buy into a certain belief without questioning it at all. So I think showing them examples of bad media and telling them, teaching them about speaker reliability and about, checking to see if the data is accurate and looking to see if that person is selling anything. Those are all ways to kind of double check and make sure that this is good media, legitimate media. And I think the sooner you can have those questions or sooner you can have those conversations, rather, the better.
Yeah. And Carissa mentioned that, if your kids aren't learning media literacy in school, if your kids are learning media, you have to have these conversations with your kids. And it's really important. And it really isn't that hard. You're going to love it. I know I've shared this story before. I think I've shared this story before on the podcast. When I was taking that media literacy class, and it was being taught by a Catholic nun. And one of the things that was surprising is she said, don't try to ban anything. It's not going to work. Instead, sit down and experience the media that your kids are interested in together. And my daughter was in 6th or 7th grade, and she was seeing a commercial for an MTV show. Was really on the airways all the time, and the show is called Jersey Shore. And my daughter's like, oh, I can't wait to watch that. And my first instinct was, I'm over my dead body. Am I going to let you watch that? But instead, I said, well, let me try this. And we sat down and we watched it together. And there are some times when I laughed when I shouldn't have laughed in front of my daughter. But at the end of the show, we sat down and we had a conversation. What do you think about this? Well, that was funny. That was crazy. Well, what do you think about this character? Do you think that character has any respect for herself? Oh, absolutely not. If she had respect for herself, she wouldn't let that person do that and that person do that. And suddenly we're in this beautiful conversation about values and about how to demand that people respect you. And I thought, this is really cool. I'm glad I did this.
Yeah, that's a great example of how you can start that conversation and start talking to your kids about, what they believe and inviting them to kind of dig deeper. Something that I think is really interesting is that we don't have as many television commercials as we used to due to streaming, and people generally, if they get the opportunity, they can skip those commercials. The advertising that's directed at kids is much more subtle now. So I think it's important, anything that they show interest in, that they follow your lead and watch that television show or watch that TikTok with their child and kind of analyze it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really, really important, especially now. Certainly, we want to help our kids understand that there are people out there trying to get their money. Mm-hmm. But also, we're talking about TikTok. There are some really crazy, dangerous trends. I guess that's the word. I think it's dumb behavior, but I guess trend is politer. But there's a lot of really dangerous trends that are being promoted on TikTok, on Instagram, and we need to sit down with our kids and just talk about that. And it's like going, okay, that looks funny, but how do you think it felt on the other end?
Right. I think that's, something that a lot of parents and educators kind of miss. They take a very, angry approach and just say, absolutely, I better not catch you on TikTok, or I better not catch you doing the things that they do on TikTok. Whereas if you more so sit down and watch it and invite your child to have a conversation, and also your student to have a conversation. I've had many conversations with students about TikToks. You'll find sort of more common ground. And I think the child comes away from that conversation a better critical thinker, which is the goal, I think, of all parents and educators in the first place.
Yeah. And I think in addition to talking to our kids about what they're consuming on these different applications, we should also talk to them about the applications themselves. And we're using TikTok as an example. And I think it's important for us and for our kids to understand that TikTok is owned in part by the Chinese Communist Party. And they may or they may not have good intentions with all the information that they are collecting from that app and from other apps too.
Yeah, that's something that I know I've had conversations with kids about, and it's just interesting. It's interesting to dig at all popular media and kind of see where it stems from, and again to analyze. Okay, what are the goals? What are the qualifications of the person in charge? I think it's important to dissect all of that with your children or your students.
Yeah. One of the things that I love to do, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I shared with Carissa before we started that I do educational magic shows around the country. And Carissa, this is my magic Bic pen. If I were to hand this to you and you were able to wave it as an educator, what would you do to make education better for our kids?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think something that has really disturbed me in the last few years regarding education has been the banning of books and the sort of blocking of tough topics. There are parents who do not want books about Rosa Parks in their child's classroom. And as an educator and as someone who came from a very small town where sort of information was limited, that's something that really bothers me. So I think if I could wave my magic pen and, change anything about education, I would allow there to be equitable access to all students in all communities to information, to, age appropriate information, to learn about maybe the less pleasant parts of our history, but to read what interests them and, to make sure that all students in all neighborhoods, in all states, in all parts of the country and parts of the world have access to the information that they want to access with teachers and parents who are guiding them to be good critical thinkers of that information.
A book about Rosa Parks being banned. That is a first. I've heard about different books that have been banned. That's the first one, and that is making my mind kind of fried the way we thought the computers would be fried back in 1999.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a teacher that's had my share of book bans, people who have wanted to ban To Kill a Mockingbird, and it truly is one of the more heartbreaking parts of the profession. So, that definitely would be my goal if I could change anything about education.
So, Doomsday Danny, are we going to continue to see Danny grow? She's a 12-year-old girl in this book. Are we going to follow her as she grows?
I would love, I've played around with the idea of continuing her story. Unfortunately, of course, not long after 1999 and 2000 is the, September 11th tragedy. And so, I kind of want to sort of end her story there. I think it's, complete and she learns a lot and she, learns a great deal about fear and about preparation. But I've toyed around with, writing about Danny as a teenager, writing about Danny as an adult, a young adult. So we'll see what happens. I'm definitely not opposed to it. And I will say, since the book has been finished, I've missed Danny a lot. She's an anxious little girl and she reminds me of myself and, my students. And so, being done with her story, it does make me a little sad. So, I'm definitely open to the possibility. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. And you mentioned your students. Any reaction from your students to Doomsday Danny?
They have been absolutely thrilled. The book definitely wouldn't exist without them. They are the catalyst. They're what gave me the idea. I've been able to kind of reconnect with some of the students I had during the time that, I was inspired to write the book, and they've been very, very excited. My current students are thrilled. They're all wanting to purchase the book and, they're very, very excited. I'm excited to share it with them. I'm nervous. But I can't wait to show them, I published this book and you all have a story inside of you and you can do it as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Hey, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about Doomsday Danny and find out more about you.
Well, they can go to CarissaTurpinBooks.com. That has all kinds of information about me. The book is also available for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble right now. Orange Blossom Books is the name of the publisher, and there's also some information on their website. And the book comes out March the 23rd. So I'm excited March the 21st. Oh my gosh. March the 21st is when it comes out. And I'm excited for the world to meet Danny and, for the world to kind of revisit 1999.
We've had a really wonderful time speaking to the author of Doomsday Danny. This conversation's, we've been partying like it's 1999. And we've been partying with the author, Carissa Turpin. Carissa, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Melissa Ahonen. She'll be here to celebrate. Her book is called It's Great to Be Me, Daily Affirmations for Kids. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Carissa Turpin. Please be sure to check out her debut middle grade novel, Doomsday Danny. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Jordan Saley, Stephanie Davila, Will Cheever, Cassandra Masonet, Sabrina Wu. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.